Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Before we get started, I'd like to share with you a Committee for Children's commitments through our equity statement and our land acknowledgement. Our commitment is to recognize, condemn, disrupt, and seek to rectify systemic injustices that create barriers to children's success. Also, Committee for Children's offices sit on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, past and present, specifically the first people of Seattle, Washington, the Duwamish tribe. Committee for Children just celebrated our 45th anniversary, and our vision is to have safe children thriving in a just and peaceful world. Our reach is throughout all 50 states. We are impacting 26.9 million children, and our mission is to foster the safety and well-being of children through social and emotional learning and development. Now I'd like to introduce to you our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Stephanie Kaupila, our Director of Curriculum. As Director of Curriculum, Stephanie leads the team responsible for the vision and strategy behind Committee for Children's innovative social emotional learning programs. Detail-oriented and a problem solver by nature, Stephanie sees issues through both a microscopic and telescopic lens. I've always found big and hairy problems enticing, she says, but it is by having an open mind, being willing to listen, and accepting some failures that I've learned to drive solutions with the greatest impact. Stephanie was drawn to Committee for Children's research-based approach and its vision for safe children thriving in a just and peaceful world. She previously worked as an elementary and middle school teacher before developing web-based mathematics curricula at Dreambox Learning. It was there that she discovered a talent for designing learning experiences in technological environments and a passion for leading teams and forming partnerships in educators and families. Jordan Posamentier, our Vice President in Policy and Advocacy. In his position as VP of Policy and Advocacy, Jordan works at all levels, local, state, federal, and international, to advance policy for equitable and effective social emotional learning. He truly makes policy and advocacy the heart and soul of his work at Committee for Children. He collaborates with many partners along the way. Throughout the pandemic, Jordan and his team have been committed to ushering forward federal relief legislation that prioritizes instruction and youth safety and well-being. Social emotional learning is a fundamental aspect of a young person's life experiences and has been historically undertreated in policy, he says. I tend to be drawn in policy areas that are complex, impactful, and evolving. Social emotional learning fits all of those and then some. Before joining Committee for Children, Jordan was a New York City public school teacher, the legislative counsel to the California Judges Association, the director of legislation analysis at Student First, and the deputy policy director at University of Washington Center on Reinventing Public Education. Jordan believes there is an intense awareness across the country about how important social emotional learning is for our young people, and policy helps that turn. Now I'd like to hand it over to Jordan to kick us off.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We have a lot to cover, Stephanie and I, and I'd like to just set the table with the kind of objectives that we're going for. So, first and foremost, I'm going to regale you with all the U.S. policy landscape affecting youth in school cell phone use, social media, and generative AI. Together, that bundles just youth and tech. There's a lot of action all across the country. I want to introduce that to you, so that when it comes time for Stephanie to talk, that will be the context in which she regales you with skill building ideas that work with these new technologies. Advancing the slides slowly but surely. Our agenda is pretty straightforward. I'm going to talk about screen time in kids. I'm going to talk about the current tech policies affecting them, and then we're going to move over to that skill building part of the equation. You are welcome to ask us questions throughout. Karina will be managing that, and I'll happily answer as we go. But let's get started. All right, there is so much going on across state legislatures affecting youth and tech. Let's just lay out what the problem is before we get to the solution. And as we go, you're going to hear I'm kind of a one-trick pony on the solution that I think really needs to happen that's missing. It's called a gap analysis in policy. And by the end of this presentation, you're probably going to be able to do it yourself because I'll say it again and again. So what's the challenge we have? We got kids spending an awful lot of time on screens these days, about 4 hours per day on social media, kids aged 8 to 12. will use that even more on average. And then especially teens are really gaining a whole lot of time on screen, 7.4 hours per day. So we know we're raising digital youth. We know that they will come into contact at some part of their childhood development with screens. And the result? Well, there's still a lot of studies underway, but screens appear to be hindering children's mental performance. Anybody who's been in a classroom with a tween or a teen can probably attest to this. I have a 10-year-old at home myself, and I can tell you it is not a smooth going ride when it comes to when I should and should not put the screen in front of my child. So look, more time per week is spent on screens than historically we've ever seen. 8 to 11 kids have screen time recommendations. Uh, this is shown by association to lower their scores on cognitive assessments. Combination of screen time and too little sleep is associated with heightened impulsivity. And then we know that people who actively use social media report greater symptoms of anxiety. The world of research still places this largely in the associative camp. It's very hard to run a randomized control trial that shows you through, a counterfactual that this is the causal effect. But we do have a significant amount of data that say we should pay attention to this and maybe be a little worried and maybe focus on some policy solutions. Which brings me to the solution. All right, there's a lot of attention in the policy around regulating social media, generative AI, cell phone use in schools. I'll tell you what I think is kind of missing all around. We are not taking enough time to support the pro-social connection that kids will have or could have on digital devices and interactions. Don't leave pro-social connection to chance. And with that chance, you really want to think about how policy can support the skills that Stephanie will talk about later. So I'm suggesting here to you today, advocate youth interaction with tech intentionally involving improvement on youth well-being. You saw the problem we just went over. This is my one-trick pony solution. And in that solution, I want to emphasize skill building over feature regulation. So the feature regulation, I'm not saying is a bad idea. If you want to age gate social media, okay, I'm not quite sure if that's going to work or not, but it's an option. If you want to stop doom scrolling, totally get it. Curfew hours, totally get it. And what I'm saying here is actually what a lot of legislatures are playing with, introducing. But what's missing is that core social and emotional skill building opportunity applied to in-person and digital experiences. So with that, let's see what the states are up to. Here comes the landscape of current tech. We've got the three categories that I'm calling youth and tech, the cells, the social media, the generative AI. Let's go to cells first. You're probably in a state or in a local school or school system that has attended to cell phone regulation in schools. This is, by the way, I wrote this in November. 8 states have passed policies to ban or restrict cell phone use. We can talk a little bit about that. And actually, I just counted this morning, there's like 14 more states have introduced this legislation. It is sweeping the country. We're probably in like second year of a 2 to 4 year process in the policy world where these kinds of policies will continue to make their way into your backyard or your front yard. Let's take first three. We'll go through all 8 real quick. So Indiana, Louisiana, and Ohio have prohibited the use of or inclusion of cells in schools in various ways. I'm not going to read these in detail. You'll be able to see these slides later. But Indiana, basically, your school's got to draft a policy. Louisiana, same thing with exceptions made for education. They'll call it learning accommodations. And Ohio, same thing, except in addition to learning accommodations, they also want to make exceptions for health conditions. Cells do a lot of things these days. For example, I know somebody with type 1 diabetes and their cell helps monitor their insulin levels. Policy development and implementation. Let's go to California, Minnesota, and Virginia. You'll notice a trend here. California has their ban with exceptions for medical and education. Minnesota, they didn't specify, they just told you to make a ban or a regulation. And then Virginia actually spent some money on this to help implement when these regulations come. I think that anticipates one of the challenges we saw in an early adopter of a ban, whose name I will not mention, but there was an issue with cost around where do you put the cells when they go to school. Yonder pouches and other devices can be used, but they cost money. So Virginia's forking over $500K for implementation. All right, last set here. We've got Florida and South Carolina. I'll do South Carolina real quick first because they're heavily local controlled. So what they did was kind of interesting. They made a model policy, and then districts can diverge from that policy if they wish. Again, they've got the health and ed exceptions. And then Florida actually has a little bit of the thing I'm about to tell you. They have an inclusion of digital literacy ed and attending to issues like misinformation and your digital footprint, like you take a picture when you're a tween, that's going to stay with you on Facebook until who knows when. So you got to be mindful of what you look like online because that kind of information can be very hard to modify as you grow up. All right. That's the sweep of the bands to date. What's missing? All right, please read to yourselves while I read aloud. We need to help kids build emotional and social competencies when navigating digital devices and experiences. You saw throughout that short list of bands almost no attention paid to skill building. We're doing regulation, but we're not working on helping kids find competency as they interact with these digital devices. Moving on to the next bucket, social media. This has gone gangbusters. We're like year 2 or year 3 of states introducing, if not passing, legislation, and there's a whole bunch more coming. At least 50 bills have already been enacted. Let's go through just a handful, just so you see what the landscape is, because this will affect how it shows up in classrooms and after-school learning settings. So again, we've got California. So remember, California already passed their social media ban. They're also pioneering protecting kids from addictive habits with respect to social media. So they've got new parental controls, notifications, usage time for minors. Again, this is all feature regulation. I have no idea how well it's going to pan out. We're early days here. It's a wait and see. Uh, Personal anecdote, I know people, parents who have kids who might bust right through those parental controls in order to give their kid access to say, something that normally is reserved for an 18-year-old because they swear on the technology or what have you. Utah is interesting. They've got an age verification. They've got some privacy setting challenges. By the way, I'm not going to go over all the litigation, but some of this stuff is getting challenged in court. And then finally, Tennessee's got a parental consent for minors issue, as well as like specific parameters around how you create social media accounts for minors. That's a little bit about what's happening. A lot of feature regulation. And on the next slide, you'll see a little more. Here's a little more. We got Colorado, Georgia, and West Virginia. So Colorado's still working on it. There's nothing too nailed down, but Department of Ed has resources. Basically, go to the website, see what they have on how to work on social media and youth. Georgia, very similar, very much headed through the State Education Agency. And then West Virginia really approaches this for online safety. And they're one of the few states that actually attends to this with regard to human trafficking. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that as we go. But again, I'm looking for something here that's missing. What's missing? I'll tell you about that in a second in case you missed it the first time. Let's get through these last set, but prepare yourself for the gap analysis. So Florida, Louisiana, and Virginia, you'll find it's all very, very similar. A lot of age verification, a lot of parental consent. And then Virginia, kind of like what we saw with Florida with digital literacy on digital footprint training, Virginia wants to make sure that you're careful with youth data and how you liberate that data is up for grabs.
Hey
So
Jordan,
yes,
we have a great question in the
what
chat
you
for
got?
you as you're rolling.
Yeah.
Um, there's a question that says, what ages does the social media ban apply to, and
Oh,
how will the new administration affect the social media restrictions?
oh yeah. So this is varying all over the country. Like if you see, I think Australia was one of the pioneers to say no social media until you're 16. The age limits vary per state, so I can't give you one clear answer on that. And people have different cutoffs. Like 14, for some reason, is a special age number for some states, and then 16 is like the latest thing. I think they are taking a page from the down under. Now, with respect to the new administration, I don't know exactly how they're interested in approaching social media for minors, but I have seen, as far as partisan politics is concerned, a lot of attention cross-partisan on this issue. They just approach it in slightly different ways. So let me go off on a tangent real quick. There are two so-called blueprints for how youth and tech legislation should roll. Texas has one of them. Connecticut has another. Connecticut borrowed from Colorado. I'm happy to give you details if you want to email me after, and we can talk a little bit more about that. Uh, but we're just past the hemming and hawing phase of policymaking in youth and tech. First phase was everybody was kind of chest pounding, saying, we really ought to do something about this. Let's make a study group. So lots of task forces, lots of study groups, lots of thinking. Now we're actually laying down policy. So whether the administration wants to support that, leave that as states' rights, eclipse it with something broader, anybody's guess. We all know what's going on right now with TikTok. I won't belabor the point, but that might set a little bit of groundwork for future considerations with respect to tech and youth. Let me finish this up and then I'll get to that gap analysis. Maryland and Minnesota, they care about data over in Maryland, and they care about ensuring minors are compensated for appearing in online content, which is far afield from my world. I have not read that bill in detail. I can just tell you that's how Minnesota's approaching it. All right, safety and legal measures is my last bucket before I move to the third one. Kentucky, you saw earlier West Virginia and sex trafficking. So that's on the protect the victim or target side. Kentucky's on the regulate sex offender side. They have to display their full name on social media in a way, hopefully, to create a deterrent for any future troubling behavior. New Hampshire is also crime focused, and so is South Dakota. Again, won't belabor these. These are fairly out of scope for me. I'm just tracking them and sharing them in case you're curious to set that context for Stephanie's skill building conversation. Speaking of skill building, what's missing? Oh, I'm glad you asked. It's the fact that these policies tend to miss building emotional and social competencies for kids to navigate digital devices and experiences. The gap remains. We've got a lot of work to do, and honestly, schools are a great place to do that work. All right, third bucket,
Yeah.
and then we're moving on.
Jordan, I have a
question?
couple more questions for
Oh,
you if you'd
sweet.
like. Yeah.
What do you got?
Will all states require protection plans for minors, and how would they enforce that?
Not all states. This is definitely a states level issue, and states are approaching this in a variety of ways, as you have seen. So how it pans out, see me in 3 years. I can probably give you a better answer at that point, but I can't tell you now. So if you're curious or if you have an opinion, write your lawmaker and let them have it.
All right. And then finally, do you foresee the new administration overarching federal regulations to supersede those state regulations? Do you see that, foresee it coming?
No, it's look. If you want me to be wrong, I'll make a prediction on this. But my sense is this administration is averse to regulation, has signaled that they want to reduce regulation. We're seeing a flurry of executive orders right now that seem to go the other way. But whether that affects this particular little pocket, I don't know. Youth and social media is really up for grabs, and I cannot tell you at this stage what they're opining. So I'm paying close attention, and should that change, again, you have our email. I will happily respond should some progress happen on that front. So the last bucket, so we've talked about cells, talked about social media. Now we're really in the wild frontier of generative AI. 32 states have already ushered around legislation, a lot of state education agency activity on this front, and we've got a lot more to go. I think we've probably got years of laying down foundational policy for artificial intelligence. But let's see where we're at to date. I'll give you a little bit of information. This one's definitely Jordan's opinion, feels super weird compared to the other two. So Tennessee and Florida are good examples of AI regulation on rules and training as it applies to kids. So Tennessee requires its governing boards of higher ed, so it's not a K-12 issue, to create rules on LEA, on local education boards for AI use in school, basically like tell us what we can do and what we can't in school. And I'm sure they're worried about cheating. Florida's providing grants to spin up some supports. I think that's in the wake of all the tutoring that's gone on post-COVID. But this is probably where we'll most likely show up for Committee for Children's mission is in terms of curbing harm. Colorado, don't let the algorithm discriminate. It's pretty clear. And do required consumer disclosures on AI. New Hampshire, don't do deepfakes. That became a real big deal as we moved into that 2024 election cycle. And then South Dakota is making sure that well, the language on the slide is child pornography, because that's what South Dakota used. Typically in the field, we say child sexually abusive images. I'm just trying to regulate that. Okay, here you are. I feel like you can read this slide by this point, right, audience? You've been here before. I'm saying it again, gap analysis. Even with generative AI, we're not helping kids navigate this experience with emotional and social competence. It's kind of a big deal because I mean, I'm sure some of you have read there are bots now, these AI bots emerging. They're supposed to be your friend bot, your helper bot. Some of them are malfunctioning and causing some significant challenges. I'm not going to be the litigator. I'm not going to tell you any causal relationship, but there is trouble brewing here where we really want to make sure kids have the right skill set as they engage in this pioneer space of tech. All right, that's what's missing.
There are a couple more questions that you want to take before we move on to the next section.
Okay, catch me before I toss the ball. What you got?
Sounds good. One question. Are you imagining that regulation will not work the way people are hoping, even if they are applied?
Oh, yes. Okay, not to be overly obnoxious, but I'm pretty bullish that future regulation is probably not going to do what we want it to do. Giving, washing our hands and saying we've mission accomplished on parental consent, no way. I mean, we can just bust through that right away. We've already seen that happen with past technology. Anybody's got a Spotify account who wants their tween to hear something with a swear word in it knows they can bust through that in no time. So I'm not convinced that's going to work. I think there are other solutions in the feature reg domain that probably will be more successful than others. Quiet hours, stop the doom scrolling. Makes sense to me. Also, though, it's nannying. And eventually we're going to get new technology. And regardless of which technology we get or how it evolves, you're still going to need these human skills of emotional and social competence that I think we're better off just making sure kids are equipped with, rather than just continually figure out which feature is bugging us, how do we futz with it. It's got to eventually come back to the individual skill set navigating whatever crazy technology we have to face tomorrow. What else you got?
Is AI capable of taking advantage of children?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. I'm the policy guy, uh, and I don't want to fearmonger, but I mean, AI, like any of these other recently technologies, can be probably manipulated. So I would say build those skills so that we can answer confidently. My kid's got it, regardless of whether the answer is yes or no.
I'd also say there are a lot of technologies out there, AI included, that were built for adults being used by children and not built for children being used by children. So there are many things that we've been seeing in AI where the intent of what was built for one outcome for an adult may be utilized differently with a child and may have some of those impacts that were not you know, foreseeable when they were building it based on their audience, right?
I don't want to leave that to chance, is really the answer that I want to provide.
Yeah.
Another question, which I think goes into our next section, is what does pro-social digital connection to build social emotional skills look like?
Oh, I feel like that's actually a pretty good segue. What does it look like? Well, Stephanie's going to give us a little more of what it looks like in the skill space. I just told you about policy. Let's move on to Stephanie's segment if we should.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all. Yeah, we're going to talk about those skill building considerations. But first, thank you for joining us. We're so happy you're here and you're so into the webinar today asking questions. So please continue to ask those along the way. My name is Stephanie Calcula. I am the Director of Curriculum here at Committee for Children, working on that second step product and beyond. And I just wanted to start off with a little about who I am so you know why I'm so embedded in this work. So I started off my career in the classroom. I was an elementary school teacher and realized really quickly that I love it, but I really wanted those middle school kiddos. So I I worked in the elementary for about 4 years, and then I made that leap into the middle school world and never looked back. I love teaching middle school. I was mostly language arts and social studies when I got to middle school, but somehow I made my way back into the math realm where I started working in Dreambox Learning after that. And that's kind of how my career in ed tech took off. But my love for kiddos is the reason that I'm here, and knowing that we need to support them in who they are. And as our generations evolve into this new tech landscape, that's why I'm here. Um, so I also have kiddos. I have two in college, two step kiddos in college. I've had them in my life for a very long time since they were little. And I have a 9-year-old daughter in third grade. So this work is very personal to me. And I actually see it playing out not only in the classrooms that we support, my spouse's classroom, my spouse is a middle school teacher, but also in my home. So I hope a lot of you here can connect with how and why are we here and what's our purpose. Um, in this, where I always start is with empathy. And I think that curiosity leads to proximity to our kiddos, which then leads to empathy, which then leads to understanding. So I always start with empathy and curiosity so I can get to that understanding. Why are our kiddos so drawn to this tech just like we are? And I keep coming back to this idea when I talk to kids around the idea of connection and communication and bringing them together. I hear a lot, I'm missing out if I'm not there. Or, how do I contact my friends? How do I make those connections when I'm not sitting next to them? Even when I'm sitting next to them, I can't, do a funny thing with them if I don't have the tech in my hand. And so I want us to start this part of the conversation with that empathy, because everybody here utilizes their technology for some of those same purposes as our kids. And so to say, it's bad, it's awful, don't let them have it. I don't want to start there. And I also want to remind us too that our kids' brains are still growing. And especially those adolescent kids where that amygdala, that emotion regulation center, is growing so rapidly, so much faster than the prefrontal cortex, that front part that is the decision making, rational problem solving part of their brain, that they're making all of these emotional decisions not based on the prefrontal cortex. We as adults have that ability to step back and rationalize a little bit better and regulate those emotions. So that's why we do focus on some of those skills as well. We'll talk about that today. But I wanted to remind you of all of that before we get into today's skill building talk, because Jordan's totally right. Policy is really important. We need to be looking out for our kids. We need adults out there having their back. But some of that is not going to always work. We see that with things that kiddos do all the time that they're not supposed to do, right? Explicit lyrics in the songs. We're hearing them through our Alexas every day, all those types of things. So let's start with empathy as we move through this. Corinna, you can stay here. We're on digital well-being. I wanted to define that a little bit for us. You can go back one, Corinna. Thank you. Digital well-being, and it refers to maintaining a healthy balance between that online life, that offline life, and all of the activities that our kiddos need to do. I often hear, I can't just put my phone down. They call me Miss K. Miss K, I can't just put my phone down because my teachers actually assigned things that I need to get through my phone or through my computer. How am I supposed to interact? The dance was not announced. It's not on the bulletin boards anymore. They don't know what that is. We had bulletin boards where, our clubs would go out and make them. They're announced online. So how am I supposed to do that? So digital well-being is that balancing act between how I can be online, what my digital footprint is, who I am online and in real life, and how I balance that. And a couple of factors there. The first one is that healthy online behavior. We're talking about digital citizenship. We're talking about encouraging responsible and positive communication skills and interactions, being respectful, noticing when it's going in a negative place or a place you're not supposed to be, and making the right decisions. Cyberbullying falls under that. Digital citizenship and mindful consumption of media, right? Mental health and emotional resilience. That can be taught. we can let kiddos know what's going on with them and sometimes to them so that they can be better consumers of the technology and things that they're doing. Privacy and security. My third grader just had this lesson. An FBI agent came into their school and talked to them specifically about privacy and security. They were talking about how to create a proper password. Sometimes we just think, of course, they'll create a password. And kiddos, they don't have this information. We have to be really granular on what skills we want them to learn, all the way from talking about something like the word privacy. What does that mean to them? Not much, right? It means that you should be creating passwords this way, or it means that you need to let an adult know when you're being reached out to by a stranger, those types of the core things. Screen time management. This one's really difficult. I saw a question pop up earlier around how are we supposed to have kiddos in my third grade class who have full-time uh, netbooks or laptops or iPads or whatever, they're supposed to be doing all their work on it. How do we get them to look up when we're teaching now, right? Those are skills that we have to teach, and those are classroom management things we need to put in place. And then balancing that offline life, letting them know when they should be offline. They're kids. They should be scraping their knees and playing. And according to some research, ER visits like broken bones and things have gone down. And while that sounds great, it actually means they're taking fewer risks in the real world and being less physical. So we should be looking at those things. So overall, skills and strategies can be learned, they can be taught, and they can be practiced just like anything else, right? And I want to throw out skills and strategies can still be learned for adults as well as students, especially with the AI revolution. As Jordan's showing, it's still very new. We're still learning a lot about it. It's in its infancy and it's going to continue to evolve, and we don't know exactly how and where it's going to go. And we need to be on our toes and understand that we too are learning in this digital well-being space as adults. So be there with your kids, be empathetic with them, and have those conversations. All right, thank you. So to Jordan's point earlier, what's missing in all of this? Skill building, strategies for how to navigate their world. I'm going to show you a few examples of our second step product and how we support some of this skill building along the way. We are continuing to grow and evolve with it as well. But the point is not that, oh, you have to get second step. Yes, I think you should get a curriculum that everybody can utilize and it's comprehensive and research backed. You can do your research on that. But what I'd like you to see here is that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all, and you can make it what you need it to be for your kiddos. Okay, so this first lesson here, we introduce responding to online bullying in our second step middle school product and program. This is really important. We have a whole bullying unit, and we wanted to make sure we balance that in-person bullying that has been talked about for decades to that now online digital bullying. It's kind of a newer phenomenon in the last decade and a half, right? And what I want you to see here is not only can it be taught, we have to tell them what cyberbullying is, why that's important, how it's different, but we can also have the kids engage in that conversation and ask them questions about it to see, remember, it's that curiosity and empathy piece, to see how is that happening online for you, right? How is that happening in person for you? Is it happening? Have you seen instances of this? Do you actually have questions about this? How does that feel and look different to you, or does it not? We don't want to make all of those assumptions for our kiddos. I've had great insights from kids in this realm that I haven't even thought of. One was actually my very best friend speaks to me differently online than they do in person. And I'm confused about that, but I've never said it out loud because I didn't realize that there could be a difference, that there is a difference. That was a middle school seventh grader who said that to me about 3 months ago. And so I said, oh, let's talk about that. So when you're coming in, you want to think about what are the skills my students need? There's a base set of skills, right? We talked about that, digital citizenship, online bullying, but also getting the kids to be engaged and central in that thinking and learning. I always ask myself, who's doing the thinking? Who's doing the learning? Who's doing the work? And if it's the teacher as the answer to most of those things, we should probably think about how do we switch that up? How do we turn that around for our kiddos and centralize them to a conversation, even when something's new? Because they do have experience in this, and you need to open up their minds to see that experience, make the connection, and then they'll engage with your skills and strategies on a deeper level. Okay, next. So we can have kiddos thinking, writing, and we can also have them sharing with each other, right? Conversation. This one gets a little trickier. Sometimes kids are quiet and you have to pull them out. But in this lesson right here, as we went through responding to online bullying, we also wanted to give them strategies that they could use and then discuss which one would work for you. So when you're teaching skills, giving them lots of strategies, just like we would in literacy or mathematics, right? We want to make sure that they have doors that they can open, inroads to this same skill so they can choose the right one for them. So we talk a lot about how do you block somebody? You can actually do that digitally, where in the real world it's more difficult. Not getting revenge. Jordan said earlier, when you put things on the internet, they actually don't go away. You might click the delete button. Do you know that they don't go away? And if you get revenge, actually, does that make you culpable to some of the online digital bullying? How do you document things? Where can you get support? What is our policy at school about reporting this? Or how do you talk to your parents about this? That's a really hard one for kiddos too. I didn't want to tell my mom because she'd take my phone away. It wasn't my fault, but my mom would take my phone away. And that feels wrong to me, right? Not sharing things you shouldn't be sharing. What does that look like? We also had a speaker in around child pornography images and how kids sharing those types of things, even with their peers in high schools who are 18 years old, suddenly that was actually a felony for them to be sharing those because they're 18 years old and they're sharing a picture from a 16 or 17-year-old, even if they were dating because they're in the same school. So all of those types of things, there are many, many skills we could be teaching, but we really need to look at who is our population and what do they need and how do we get there. Go ahead, Karina. Thank you. It's a great segue to our next slide because this is one of our high school lessons and it's called What Would You Do? And we've really put those high schoolers in the center of their learning experience in high school. They're ready for it. And so we give them a little tidbit of information. Oversharing is when you give too much personal information online, giving them those examples of what they might be doing. And sometimes they might not even be thinking about what they're doing in that regard, right? Oh my gosh, venting about a personal problem. Everybody does that, right? Actually, that could have these implications or ramifications down the line. It could impact employment opportunities. Maybe employers are seeing some of that behavior online and things that the kids aren't thinking about outside of their social circles. Go ahead, Karina. So we have conversations about deciding what kiddos should share online. This is a skill that they have to build. Stop, think, and then do, right? We can have them make those decisions and share together and ask them questions and not just tell them, this is what you should share online. This is what you should not share online. Let's get them to come to those conclusions. And those are some of the ways that we can help them build the skills and make deep connections with, oh, my online life, I do this. This one actually applies to me. And that one really doesn't. I wouldn't do that, right? Because our kids are going to be different in different communities, different classrooms, even the same kiddos in front of you every single day from period to period in your schools, they're going to have different personalities and make different connections. So we want to ask them those questions and have them bring it up. And then support them with safety tips. Give them the information and they will utilize it, even if they call you cringe in the process, which I get called at home all the time. You can have them do different things with that information. They can create from it. You can say, actually, what if you were tasked with teaching younger kiddos about this? What are some things that you might do? Share a set of practices, or would you give a presentation? Would you have a mock example of what that thing is and ask them, what would you do? When you have them teach it, they deeply learn it, apply it, and have to execute on that with others. And so that's something that's ingrained in them. You're doing that every day in the classroom, but skill building for digital wellness does not have to be them receiving information. It can be them actively engaging in it to learn it and doing it on their side as well. Go ahead. Great. So what does skill building look like in practice? I can't give you, I mean, the list is so long of all of the skills and all of the strategies you could be teaching. It's just like literacy. You open that can of worms and it all comes pouring out. But we can give you some baseline things to think about, and you can dig into those buckets of information, right? It's not one size fits all, but of course, classroom activities and lessons, what Jordan was talking about earlier, those skills, those strategies, all of that skill building we can do it in classrooms, and we can partner with our parents to do it as well. That might look like teaching students how to fact check online information, especially through AI. We think AI is the fix all. Actually, it can hallucinate. Teaching kids about those types of information can be really important. Role playing scenarios to practice conflict resolution online. It's different than conflict resolution in person, right? Interactive lessons on identifying persuasive techniques in digital media. How is the media actually trying to persuade us to do other things and all of that, right? It could look like students creating campaigns to promote digital wellness in their communities. Maybe they want to take that step. They feel strongly about this. Let them take the ball on it as well. And then maybe they want to develop posters for the walls and offline things to get back to the days of yore before we had all of this digital information share, right? The next one would be modeling healthy digital habits. Teacher, this one is super hard, right? They're watching us. Sometimes we say, do as we say, not as we do, but they're watching. Our kiddos at home are watching. Are you coming home and you're on your phone all night? In the classroom, are you on your phone doing things? Are you on tech doing things for the classroom, or are you doing other things? They're watching, and we can model using that technology. And when things come up for us, say, hey, something just came up for me. Can I let everybody know what that thing is? And how do I problem solve it? Help me out here. Demonstrating how to unplug is a really great thing too. Say it out loud. Hey, I'm setting my phone down intentionally, and I'm not going to come back to it until right before bed, where I have to set my alarm for the next day, or whatever that looks like, and let them know, be vocal about it. There are a lot of digital wellness tools out there. There are apps that help monitor and manage screen time if kiddos need it. Some kiddos told me, I can't manage it. It's like an itch I have to scratch. I have to grab my phone. So we can help them with some apps. We can teach them how to focus, put on focus modes and do not disturb modes. There's digital technology that is helpful for that. Having guided discussions, we've talked about this throughout the presentation, is put them at the center of it. Let them problem solve and think about it. They're going to come to solutions that either we've already thought about or not, but how does that apply to them? And it's more likely that they're going to find the connectivity and application for that in their lives. And then exploring real life scenarios. It's in the news all the time. Jordan was talking about AI and the bots. We've had a lot of news coverage recently about bots. You should look it up. It's not a positive thing, it was a negative thing, but that's something you can bring into the classroom. A 15-year-old was deeply impacted by this and his family. And that's something you can talk to your kiddos about. You know, what decisions were made? How does this technology play out in our lives? And then incorporating breaks and offline activities in classrooms. Somebody brought up, my third graders have their tech all the time. Incorporate those break times. We close our lids, right? We turn it off, we put it away. And also, today we're not actually using our computers. Today, maybe we're doing something that is offline, right? We're going to make a collage, or we're going to handwrite our first draft of our essays. That's always fun to do, right? Encourage those outdoor activities when you can, all of those things. So anything we talk about in the SEL realm, as well as that digital citizenship realm, self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, digital citizenship, critical thinking, all of those can be through the lens of offline, like we've historically thought about it, but also your online life and digital footprint and who you are there. And then finally, how can learning communities take those steps to advancing the digital well-being in schools. First of all, we have to prioritize it. As Jordan was talking about, policy development is one way to prioritize that. Advocating for policies, supporting legislation, writing your policymakers and letting them know what you need in your schools for your kiddos. And then training and professional development. Continue getting that training and professional development so that you are ahead of the curve of your students and you can help guide them and nudge them in the right direction. The next one is involving stakeholders. Our community engagement, our parent involvement, all of that, creating support systems around you is so important. All the adults in our kiddos' lives, from the time that they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night, are stakeholders in this movement. Involve them. How can we make them central to supporting our students in all of their environments throughout the day? And how can you get creative to do that and make it work for your school and your home environments? You could host workshops. You can offer guides for parents. You can share these strategies with your parents directly. All of those things are really, really important. And then finally, incorporating digital well-being into your curriculum. Teach the skills. Find something that works for your school. We have a solution for you, but go out there and really, really vet it. What is going to work for you? Why? What are you actually looking for? And is it one thing or is it a set of things? Is it something internally that you've created or is there something externally that will work for you? We want to leverage technology for good, and we want to leverage it for a way that makes things that aren't possible in the real world for learning experiences possible for our kiddos so that they actually grow and learn. Everything else is just noise, and we want to focus on that. Next. So I'll circle right back around. I want you to remember that kids are seeking connection. They're seeking now online with social media and all of the apps and all the things they do. They're seeking communication. They're seeking now belonging and community. And some of those things that they used to only get in person with their peers, they're getting online as well. So come with that curiosity. Get close to them, that proximity. Let's find some empathy so we can get to a place of understanding to help our kiddos.
Thank you so much. Now we can get into the Q&A part of the presentation. So I can go ahead and there's a ton of activity happening in the Q&A. I can get started with a few questions. Stephanie, there are a ton of requests asking about any articles or resources that you can share to support the presentation here, just additional resources that we can provide. So there's that. Do you have any recommendations and or cheat sheets of all these topics to cover the skills or the delivery of these skills?
We can supply that.
I mean, honestly,
Oh,
go for it.
Oh, we can supply that in the follow-up
say,
information.
It's probably me. My internet's going in and out. Sorry.
Go ahead.
We can go ahead and supply that through our post email to the attendees. So any kind of resources we have there. We also have links to this presentation at the end. There's resources and research that we've linked throughout the presentation. So you can go ahead and click on those links there too.
Thank you.
Another question that came through is, how do I get students to stay on a digital platform that I need them to stay on and learn on?
To stay on it instead of being on a different tab, potentially. That's something we've definitely seen.
Pretty much,
It's difficult. So there are several ways that I've seen it done. I've done it before. One is having students seated in a way that you can actually see their screens, and generally you're walking around and that proximity to them will force them to do it. Figuring out how on those platforms you're asking them to engage, and how do you know that they've engaged to do the thing you need them to do? And then also schools have monitoring technology where you can actually put the screens up on your board. For me, that's a last resort if it's totally necessary. But I would say that when kiddos are working, what are you asking them to do? What do they need to get done during that time? And how are you making sure and monitoring they're getting that finished. And if they're finished, what are their other options? Have we communicated that to them? Can you go to a different tab and do something else? Should you get your book out and read? What are those things? And having that conversation. That doesn't mean you're going to catch every kiddo, but I would include them in, hey, it's very frustrating when X, Y, and Z is happening. The work I'm seeing is not getting completed. Can you all help me out in brainstorming how we can solve this problem together? Because we're having a problem. And it's something that you can involve them in as well.
Another question, there's a little bit of context beforehand. Part of the push for regulation is that phones and social media are inherently set up to be addictive. I find it in my own life. I have to have my phone in another room to not be disturbed, or I have that itch to look at it. No matter what tool app, I try to block myself from using it. The question is, do you think part of the discussion for kids should be around addiction and how to identify addictive behavior?
Jordan, I saw you come off. You're
You know,
excited.
addiction does get regulated in policy quite a bit. What I worry about with that conversation in this context is that we can get very focused on does it belong in or outside of this category, when I actually think a more productive conversation would be what goals is this child pursuing and what habits help that child and get in the way from pursuing those goals. Because you can develop habits that impede goal obtainment without ever having to say addiction. So constantly checking your phone when you should be doing your homework, that's impeding, say, the goal of doing well in your classroom academically. And then you can have the conversation about what habits are good. So get the phone out of the room, because even if it's nearby, your attention is misdirected toward that when it needs to be focused on, say, problem solving with your peers on a project that's due tomorrow. Did you want to add anything to that, Stephanie? And I know we're almost out of time.
Yeah, we're almost out of time. I'll just add, I feel it too. As an adult, we have that. And again, that empathy, it's like letting them know, I feel that way too. What are some things we can do? I love this idea of putting the phone out of the room. Kids might not innately do that themselves. So it might be, hey, let's talk about what times of day do we have? Some people have a special box or a drawer that they put them in and they do it together. And during that time, what can we do together? Often we're trying to have student or kid focused problems solved with adult focus, like, oh, you'll just put your phone away, now go play. Can you also say, hey, I'd like to play a board game with you, or can your friend come over and we can have a soccer game in the backyard? So we have to get a little uncomfortable too, or do the thing that maybe we might not have volunteered to do in order to help them break those habits and maybe even help us break those habits a little bit.
I think we have time for one more question. Perhaps afterwards we can take these questions and answer them and send them into our post email. I know we've done that in the past. This was a great presentation. Last question that we'll take is, what would you recommend as the best first next step for district leadership on this topic?
Oh, Jordan, I thought you were going to say something there.
Well, you know, every district's
I
got to make
saw
their
it.
own decisions. I'll tell you what I think would be helpful is, you know, talk to your teachers, talk to your families, figure out what their hopes and dreams are, fears and worries are, and then orient your solution with that in mind. You can even use AI to help you organize all that input. Stephanie, what were you going to say?
Very similar. Again, I think it's that prioritize this as something. You need to go look at all the things that are going on. As a teacher, I remember, oh my gosh, how many things do I have to do? Really come into that conversation saying, this is a high priority because it actually touches all of those other things that our kiddos are doing. It's impacting academics in certain ways, right? And that's where we see what we care about, what we're measuring, right, at the federal level. So how do we have that conversation with how do we prioritize this and have a conversation? And then to Jordan's point, what is the right solution for us? How do we get there? What are the problems happening in our community and what do we need to implement? It's not a one size fits all. So I would highly recommend having those conversations and saying them loud as well. You know, when you hear no, for me, that's just fire to say, all right, what's the new what's the new pathway to get into the conversation because they heard something differently than maybe I was intending to say.
Thanks. Thank you both so much. This was such an engaging, dynamic, and extremely relevant topic for today. And really want to thank everybody for joining us on the webinar. Just wanted to share a few resources to our attendees that they can take action now. And if you scan this QR code here, you can go ahead and start advocating for social emotional well-being with your as a constituent to your legislation. Jordan, do you want to talk a little bit about this, the Take Action Now QR code, or
It's very self-explanatory. It makes it very easy for you to tell your lawmaker that this matters to you, so it should matter to them.
fantastic? Thank you. Also, if you'd like to connect with committee for website here, our customer service phone number, please go ahead and give us a call. We always like to hear from you. Our support email. Also, if you'd like to have some more information on how to bring Second Step to your school or district, you can go ahead and complete our Second Step district consultation form. And we also have a ton of on-demand webinars that we can that you can go ahead and take a look at with a lot of other pertinent topics such as this, positive school culture. Another one that we just did with Stephanie not that long ago with bullying prevention that goes into further depth into that topic as well. Please feel free to take a look at that.